all of the subjects she'd flunked last spring. "Oh, yeah?" Rhyme said, hoping the donor might distract Ms. Sharp from their impending trigonometry session. "Who sent the donation?" Rhyme asked, rising up on her tiptoes to peek over Ms. Sharp's shoulder. "From the desk of Silas Manderley," was written in curly letterhead at the top. "Nobody you'd know," Ms. Sharp answered curtly, looking up. "Are you already done with that box? Because we have a date with our good friends, sine, cosine, and tangent, coming up momentarily." Rhyme sighed and shook her head. It was going to be another long day. Ms. Sharp was curating an Attaway retrospective exhibit at the county fair this summer, and Rhyme had been tasked with reading through ancient newspapers to find stories that might be of general interest. Which was funny, Rhyme thought, considering there was absolutely nothing interesting about Attaway, then or now. 5 days a week, Rhyme sat at the same round table facing the back courtyard, bent over a huge stack of yellowing papers. Today she wore a rose-colored summer dress and white slip-on sneakers. Her brown hair hung in 2 long braids. Doe-eyed and sincere, Rhyme was often described by adults as the girl next door. Maybe it was intended as a compliment, but what Rhyme heard was young, quiet, unassuming. She had never craved the spotlight, but that didn't mean she wanted to be overlooked. And speaking of overlooked, Rhyme forced herself to focus on the task at hand. In the past few weeks, she had learned more about Attaway than she'd ever cared to know. Fallout shelters, scandalous mini-skirts, which didn't seem all that mini, someone from Attaway who came in 10th at an international yo-yo contest, a new fondue restaurant that opened in 1974, the basketball game versus Millwood, where the marching band was suspended for performing a Beatles song instead of the national anthem. "Look at those beehives," said a voice behind Rhyme. It was Matilda, an older girl from school. Until last year, Matilda had been the editor-in-chief of the school paper. She was in her usual black overalls with a gray Attaway High t-shirt underneath. She wore her hair loose and unstyled, constantly tucking it behind her ears as she whizzed through the Dewey Decimal System. Miraculously, Matilda actually seemed to enjoy their surroundings. "Sorry?" Rhyme asked. "That hairstyle," Matilda said, pointing out a blonde poof from a photograph of the 1967 groovy fall ball. "Oh, right," Rhyme said, tugging at her own braids self-consciously. She'd never heard of a beehive before. "And that's my section," Matilda said, reaching over and gathering up all of the clippings spread out on the desk. "I guess you're welcome, then," Rhyme said with a weak grin. "More work for me and less for you." "Actually, you're wrong," said Matilda, bringing the papers over to the other side of the table. "Now it's even more work for me." She scrambled around in her bag for a pen. "You totally messed up the order." "That might be a little bit of an exaggeration," Rhyme said, holding her thumb and pointer finger just a tiny bit apart. But Matilda was no longer looking at her. "Do you spend a lot of time with archival materials while you're practicing your handstands?" Matilda said under her breath, jotting something down in her notebook. "I'm a dancer," said Rhyme, trying to make her voice as pleasant as possible. "Not a gymnast." "Whatever floats your boat." Matilda rearranged a bunch of red leather yearbooks. Rhyme sighed. This was officially going to be the most boring summer of her life. Chapter 2. Later that evening, Rhyme walked home, exhausted from the day of sinusoidal functions and 60s hairdos. She glanced at her phone. No new messages. No gossip, no selfies.